Good morning.
Good morning.
Good.
Oh yeah, good. Oh, have a good morning. Whew. I didn't know you had it in you.
Neither did I.
Wow.
We-
Another great start to a morning.
we were watching Tiny Desk. You ever watched the Tiny Desk
the
concerts?
concerts?
Yeah. So we were watching
NPR,
Tiny
yeah.
Desk yesterday, and one of the ones that came on was Jagged Little Pill, which evidently is a musical, a Broadway musical based on the Alanis Morissette album, Jagged Little Pill. You heard of that one?
Yeah,
Hand in My Pocket.
Yeah, because that was when I guess I was in like high school or something. That was
nice.
back in the 50s.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the funny thing was like we were watching and we'd watched all these, I don't mean this in a bad way, but like a regular band or regular artist that wasn't a Broadway, group. But then as we were watching them, it's, first off, it's kind of a larger group. But then they also had that theater sparkle in their eyes where they all like look at each other and they're like, I'm having a great time and you're having a great time and we're smiling at each other and we're like, yeah, you know what I'm talking about?
I do. It's like it's like when a musical's about to bust out in a Disney movie, and you're just like, no,
Make it stop, no.
Everyone's eyes get the weird dumb face.
Yeah,
and, it's like dancing face, but it's like pre-dancing face.
Yes.
Yeah.
If any of you guys out there know what the name is for the pre-dancing face, I want to know. I want to know what this pre-dancing, because it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, because everyone does it. It's like, I'm signaling you. Are you catching it? Yeah.
And then it's just like, oh, we're singing, we're harmonizing. And it's just like you look to your shoulder like, yeah, we're harmonizing together.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is the best.
Did you ever see the show Glee?
No.
Yeah. Well, they had plenty of that on there.
Oh, I'm sure
you can imagine. It was basically exclusively that.
Yeah, it was just that look over and over again. Yeah. Or they would save it until the very end, like they used to do in the He-Man movies. He would never pull out the sword, like in the cartoon when I was a kid.
Nice.
Or Airwolf. Do you remember this show?
I've heard of it. I don't know if I would watch that one.
You would watch the entire episode going like, why aren't they showing the helicopter? And then in like the very last like minute and a half, all of a sudden the helicopter would come out and save the day.
And everyone's like, yeah.
It's like, I wonder if they save the Glee face for the action sequence. It's like action sequence for romance nerds.
Okay, I gotta ask you. Do you save your Glee face?
Yeah, I do actually. You're pretty much the only person that's ever seen my Glee face, Reed.
Let's show everyone at home what your pre. There we go. That's pretty good. Everyone, there you've now had it. Ryder's pre-ensemble face.
Yeah. And the unfortunate thing is most people are like, "Oh God, no,
no, make it stop, make it stop."
Quit making that face,
and,
white
and
man.
then after that face comes the singing, and they're like, I'm melting.
I know. Yeah, it is also like when a guy's been practicing his dance moves at home, and then he gets out on the dance floor and he does it, tucks the lip and does the little bites the tongue, and then does the little Michael Jackson spin, and everyone just goes, oh no,
stop, please make it stop. And then that's when the people go press the button and the floor opens underneath and they just fall into the pool.
Yeah, with the sharks with lasers attached to their heads. Yeah,
lasers. Well, good morning, everybody. Don't worry. Today is only Tuesday, which means hump day is tomorrow.
Oh, thank goodness.
That's why we have our pre-glee faces.
Because
tomorrow it'll change. But today is Tuesday, December 28th. We are getting close to the end of the year. Did you know the year end was coming up?
What? This year?
No, it told me.
Been like 6 months.
Oh my goodness! Oh. So today is Tuesday. It's episode 62. Yesterday, we talked. We welcomed back after the holidays.
Yeah, which was always fun. Talked a little bit about the family dynamics and what we did. Yeah, it was good.
Talked a little bit about some food we ate, things we were like, this was great about our holidays. If we changed one or two things, this would be it, and those natural type of thing.
We talked a little bit about movies.
Yeah, and then we talked a little bit about goal setting as well. And we were encouraging people like, hey, as you're coming into this whole season of resolutions and change yourself and all that type of thing, it's like, all right, well, here's some kind of tricks and tips to, make sure you don't fall into the traps that a lot of people do where they set the big goal and then next thing you know, 2 days later they failed it, right? Or
and then you just hide or burn that list and just go ahead and declare
exactly.
you never made any goals.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is, if you're wondering, like, who needs a goal, we were just talking, right, Grider, dude, where have all your muscles gone? Get back to the gym, would you?
I was just telling Reed, I've lost about 20 pounds of muscle since the pandemic, which is a shocking amount of muscle I never knew I had.
What I was about to say, and I didn't say it earlier, but my response really was, I don't think I've ever had 20 pounds of muscle to lose.
It's just like it was gradual. It took about 2 solid years of not doing anything,
and then a nice 6 to 9 months of not doing anything.
Just tons and tons of time.
It's just like credit card. It's like they'll take your money instantly, but it takes forever to get it back.
Yeah, it's weird how that works. I can't believe they don't give it back.
I know.
Yeah, it's strange.
It's too bad the muscle credit card gods are like that too.
Yeah.
I bet if you showed them your pre-glee face, they would be more likely.
Can you imagine this glee face but with more muscle?
But with you're just in there smiling. You got the face, little biceps just like come out of your
20
arm.
pounds of cheek muscle.
Yeah, just chiseled. So we were talking a little bit about goals. We also introduced just briefly the concept of SMART goals, and we're talking about, hey, setting your goals to be specific, measurable, actionable, and then time related, because we can't remember what the R was. I think it stands for writer.
Yeah, there we go. Or read.
Or read. You never know.
Make your goal read.
And then we kind of also alluded to, focusing kind of more on like the 1% every day kind of thing, where you're doing a small something that's more often versus trying to do some big thing. And also, hey, we get that you're trying to make improvements, but you don't want to try and make them all at one time.
Yeah, they're just a recipe for disaster.
Yes. And if there's anybody who knows about disaster, it's Disaster Man.
I wish. Does he have a theme song?
I don't know.
He should.
Ow! My leg. Why'd you do that?
I know. Disaster whiny man.
I was just fine until you came to try and save me.
I will save you, young child.
Right. Now I have no legs.
That got dark.
I was so happy before this. I had a reason. So I looked up SMART goals so we can say it. It's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. Time-based. Time-based, man.
Nice.
Yeah, that's how you get it. Time-based, yes. So, we were 80% of the way there. There's another one that says actionable. So it looks like there's some minor dispute on exactly actionable, realistic, actionable, relevant, something along those lines. So that was yesterday. Any other thoughts about yesterday? Oh, our goal.
Oh, yeah. We did have a little challenge there. I think I started rambling about goals. Like, hey, have them. Think about them. write something down. And then Reed was a little more specific, which was great because it was actually actionable. Nice. But yeah.
Nice. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah. He actually said to come up with a goal this week, something that you were going to do this week, not something huge or grand or, 2022 goals. But of course, my goal for this week is to develop my 2022 goals.
There you go.
So a goal to make goals.
Goalception. I like it. Yeah. And then part of the thought process behind that was, hey, get started right now. Do something small that is something that you even know you're going to be able to do. Just set it low. I mean, it's just like, hey, I'm gonna go to the bathroom today.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With my Glee face on. And it's gonna be the best bathroom experience I've ever had.
Are you gonna record it?
I'm gonna record it.
You've got to record. It has to be measurable and attainable. And
that's a good point.
You're gonna have
to
like, probably document this.
If
goal.
you don't measure it, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Are you gonna?
Yes. So while everyone thinks about that, we'll be right back. Helpful for life. And welcome to What the Hell is Water? I'm Reed Garcia, founder of Helpful for Life.
This is Ryder Richards.
Confused man.
Yeah. Somewhat gleeful in private.
In private.
The privately gleeful guy.
Privately gleeful. PG.
PG.
That's what it comes from.
It. Okay, finally.
Yes, you can only watch PG movies in private. I think that's what they were.
Yeah, because no one needs to see that Glee face.
You gotta be careful
Keep
about where you show it.
Yeah.
You show it in the wrong spot. No!
Like at a funeral or something.
Yes.
But that does seem like where it would show up, and then they would sing a song, and they're just like, oh.
Yeah, well, it's just everyone's like crying, and it's like, oh man, we're so sad, but they lived such a good life, and it's like I feel like something just. I had hope, but then he died, and I didn't believe anymore. And then someone said, "Did you say?"
What did you say?
You didn't believe? And then they look at their friend and they say, "Oh, I do." And then they bring up.
I know that from the. I never understood what that thing was, and no one told me. So we'd go to church, and the guy would bust out the little key.
Well, it's whiskey. Thing. It's like, okay, I'm about to have to put my Glee face on. This is church in front of all these people. Just get a little. Yeah, actually, it's a vape pen. The choir boys or choir leads were vaping before it was cool.
Way before, man.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just see them do that little thing, and then they would just sing the same song the same way they always did, and I was like, I don't think that little thing helps.
Okay, maybe try a different hole.
Yeah, the church I grew up in was all a cappella, so there's no musical instruments. It was this pretty strict sect of Church of Christ, and so you weren't allowed to have any musical instruments. So these, guys would get up there and
it's the tuning disc or something.
Yeah, and it's like a key of G or something.
Right.
And then they would just and you just go, what is happening? But you're trying to follow along, because that meant that you were a good believer,
right? But you were never distracted by the song. You were always focused.
Just tuned in. Yeah.
Tuned in. Nice. I like it. Lots of Glee faces were had in that church.
No, that was illegal in our religion. No Glee face.
So today we are going to be talking about a couple of things, and we'll see per usual where it takes us. But first off, we're going to talk about with the repetitious repeater. We're talking a little bit about what do you do when you find yourself keep doing the same thing over and over, even though you recognize I should be doing something else, or I don't want to be doing that, but I can't manage to actually make it happen. And then on a somewhat related note, but slightly different, we actually have another GAR. We've got a GAR, which is a Go Ask Ryder and Reed. This will be, I think, our third, maybe fourth one of these. And this one is a question from a viewer about, similarly, they know they want to do something better, and they haven't got to the point maybe where they've repetitively not done it, but they can see themselves moving down that path. So they're kind of like, all right, I know I want to do this thing. I want to learn a new language, or I want to, learn some new skill, or I want to start exploring more. I want to start, going to the gym, even though I never gone before. I want to start doing this new thing, but I don't know how to get like the motivation or the will or the desire, the willpower. Or as Ryder calls it, the wheel power.
Wheel power.
The wheel power, because it just keeps going in circles.
Power.
Yeah, and it's a big zero.
Power.
Yeah,
I like it.
Wheel power.
Yeah, it's more like it's related to trucks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's a Hemi. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. Let's start off with the repetitious repeater. So, what does something pop to mind when you're like, man, I feel like, okay, when you say that, I've either had that happen in the past or having something right now, or, I had something in the past and then now again and then again, and it just keeps going. Like what pops to your mind?
Yeah, there's little things that I think we've touched on in the show before. Like, big picture is that I'm a guy that has lots of special skills, right? Like, as far as art making or whatever else it might be. And so I do podcasting, I do art making, I do all these projects. And I think it was yesterday or the day before, I found myself, instead of actually working on my podcast, which I need one more episode out before the end of the year, I was actually redesigning the website. The website was totally fine.
Right.
There was no need to touch it.
No complaints came in about the website.
No one. All 3 people that have visited it liked it, But yet, I tend to do this every year around this time. Is for some reason I just hop in and I start redesigning my websites. And part of it is that I actually find a kind of comfort in doing it. I like doing it, but it's also pretty much a tremendous waste of time because it's not moving the needle in any direction that is smart. Yeah. It's not measurable, repeatable. Like I could repeat these things. It's not doing anything for me that lets me be more productive. I can't show this to anybody and say, look at how productive I was, because this is not something that will get my career or anything I do to the next level. So what I probably should be doing is spending that time actually somehow either making more art and then marketing that art, because I don't think making more art is also the answer for me. I have a ton of art. So what I'm really missing is the marketing and promotion that will turn my art somehow into something sustainable, whether that's dollars or reputation. And yet I don't find myself doing this for my podcast. I don't find myself doing it for any of these things. I'm supposed to be building a gate so that we can protect our house from people now that we have that new driveway. And instead, I don't know, working on staining some cherry wood because I like doing that more. Sanding with 220 grit, just really getting finer and finer with the sanding. And I'm just like, why am I spending my time doing this instead of the very practical, real thing that's just right outside that will make both me and my wife happier?
Yeah. Yeah. And, Steve's been out there for a while. He's like, come on.
Waiting.
Yeah.
Just a second. I got this.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go down to 400 grit.
I was going to say, I've got an 800 grit out here just for you.
I'm going to wet sand this
now.
Yeah,
exactly. No, I can definitely relate, minus the, guy outside my house. He may be out there. I don't know. But
you never leave.
Yeah. Sometimes you're just looking outside, watching the people walk by, and then you just see him. He's just standing there, just smiling, staring.
Yeah, it's not glee face at all.
No glee face at all on that one. Yeah, it's not exactly productive procrastination, but it sounds kind of similar to it, right? Because it's not like you're doing nothing, but it's also
stuff. Yeah.
What's that?
I'm doing stuff.
Yeah, you're doing stuff, but it's not exactly the most impactful thing that you could be doing, right? And as an artist, like, you are essentially an entrepreneur, right? And the same kind of thing for me and my business is like, all right, every day we have to figure out, like, there's literally this entire wide spectrum of things that you can do. And oh, by the way, every time you start doing one thing, it's going to spew all of these other things that you could logically say, like, oh, well, you need to do that. You need to figure that out. But it's just like, realistically speaking, you don't have the time or the space or energy to do all of the things. You've got to down select, you got to choose, and oh, by the way, there's no one else really doing that for you. You've got to be the one to prioritize that for yourself. And whether or not you're an entrepreneur, like, you're probably doing this either at home and or at work every day. And the benefit of doing it at work, or you work for somebody else, is someone else is footing the bill and is accepting whatever inefficiencies you have when you're by yourself, when you're doing it. It's like, those inefficiencies are just hurting you.
Yeah, it's very, that's it is kind of an interesting thing to get into. You could kind of do some pushback as well. Like I think some of the things that go through my head when I'm trying to rationalize out why I'm doing this is one of them being that when I'm in the art studio, I always think it's important to clean the studio before you get started on the next project. And I think that cleaning actually gives your brain time to prep what the next stages are as you're working, so that you kind of give yourself kind of a time or a moment to sort of clean up and do this. And it can feel like you're kind of killing time rather than getting the work done. But I think it does something for your head. So I think about that a lot. I think about giving yourself a little bit of downtime in order to gear up for the thing, getting the space prepped, getting all the distractions out of the way so you can focus. So sometimes I think of it like that, and then other times I catch myself inventing new things. Right? Like it's like I just cleaned the whole studio, and now I'm like, well, I don't have a place to put my broom. I'm going to build a place to put my broom. And so it just keeps going. So I kind of run into that cycle on occasion. And it gets even worse with digital stuff, because with digital things, you can spend forever sitting in front of the computer and you can't prove that you did anything.
Oh, you ain't lying.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a couple of things like that I'm better off, of course, with deadlines. I'm better off, even if they're self-inflicted deadlines. Mm-hmm. Even if I'm a day or two late getting it out, then at least this starts the alarm clock going.
Yeah.
You're already late. Like, you need to get on this.
Right. Even if it is self-imposed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, this is making me think of a video that I watched a week or two ago. It's actually 2 videos. And I've referenced this YouTube creator before. They're called How to ADHD, and I don't remember exactly which topic we brought up, but last time. But the nice thing about this is she's talking through the lens of someone who has ADHD and is trying to find things to do. Oh, I remember now. She had given a tour of her house, and after we talked about Pokeyoke the other day, we referenced this video, and we're like, hey, she implements all sorts of Pokeyoke in her life to help make things easier for her. Even something like making the coffee. She puts all this. Pokeyoke is when it's like you set things up to where there's very little to no chance of someone doing it wrong. So for example, in the manufacturing world, it's like, okay, can you plug this thing in upside down? If so, then it's not, designed well for Pokeyoke. So the way she implemented Pokeyoke in her house was she put all of the coffee stuff right next to each other, so she didn't have to go walk over to the pantry to get something and then get distracted and then go do another thing and then go do another thing. It's like, all right, I'm keeping all the stuff right here. So that was at least one of the videos we referenced of hers in the past. But this one that I'm referencing is a 2-part series, and it's called it's called Why Is It So Hard to Do Something That Should Be Easy? And then the second one is called How to Do Something That Should Be Easy But Is Not. And it's actually, she brought on a guest that she was talking to. His name is Brendan Mahan. I may be messing up his last name, but he has something called the wallofawful.com. So this is basically his metaphor, and she had an animated video kind of talking through it, and the idea is like, hey, you're going to do this task and you have this wall of awful in front of you, and you're like, I can't get through this thing. This is gonna suck, right? This is the thing that and it depends on, it's not always that you feel this like big desire, like I don't want to do that thing. There's certainly times that, but there's often easier things or other things you'd rather be doing, kind of like you were talking about, right?
I mean, if you're good at something, right, such as I like fiddling with websites, I like designing things,
right?
I like drawing, I like making art, I like getting fussy about sanding things. Like, those are comfort zones for me.
And I also will point out that it's not a coincidence in my mind, that a lot of the things that I personally, and I bet a lot of people, find satisfying to do when they're doing a little bit of productive procrastination, they have very clear and visible signs of progress.
Yes.
Right? And that could be just a sticky note that has a bunch of little things on it that you get to cross off and get that little dopamine hit every time. It could be like your kitchen, which is very visibly dirty and then it's very visibly clean afterwards. Or it could be, this cherry wood that is now like a darker cherry.
Nicer. Yeah, I didn't actually stain it. I'm just sealing it just for those of you wood junkies out there.
Just
no, there is something about all of it's one of the things I've read about in a couple of books, but it's one of the problems that we've come across in our current society with cognitariat labor is that people
say that word again.
Cognitariat labor. So the cognitariat basically sort of meaning like cognition.
Okay.
So
like
whenever
recognition, like understanding.
Cognition being the process of thinking, right? Okay. So when you're a cognitariat laborer, you're basically just using your brain power to make your money.
Like a knowledge worker?
Yeah, knowledge worker. So this idea is that, of course, now that we're doing this, it's harder and harder to see the results from what you do, or the results take 3 to 5 years to show up.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, and so if you were a carpenter, if you were a bricklayer, then at the end of the day, you can go, I did that. You can point and you can feel satisfaction from that. However, now we don't get that. And so what do you do with this inability to actually feel productive? Right?
Yeah.
Because you work really hard, you're exhausted when you come home, and when somebody asks you what you do, you're like, well, I thought about a lot of things, and I made a lot of very tiny decisions that we're not going to see the impact of for the next 5 to 7 years.
Thanks for describing my life for the last 4 years.
Right? and then everyone's like, I wonder why people feel depressed in these jobs, or why they can't find life purpose or meaning, or they're not satisfied, or they're not happy. And you go, yeah, because there's nothing they can point at that really shows or proves in a real tangible way their value that they're adding back to the world.
Exactly. And I think that's only amplified by the type of job or task you have and how, visible it is to other people.
Yes.
Because there are some jobs, like mine, for example, literally on public display, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like people ask, well, what do you do? It's like, well, you can go look at the things that I've done, but also there's so many things that are going on behind the scenes. Like, this morning I plugged in the new computer to finally try and use it for a stream. And it's like, well, this thing's not working. Now I got to change that. I got to fix this. And now I got to make a note to go do more research later, even though I have no desire to do any of those things. But those are all things that I've got to do, and, so yeah, I can totally relate to all of that. The other thing I was gonna say, but it's easy to forget about, like, hey, there's tons of people who go to their jobs every day, and like you never hear or know anything about their progress or what they do or whatnot, and so it's easy to forget,
Yeah, I think it's just one of these little things that's part of our new world where 200 years ago this maybe wasn't such a thing. Only a few people had this problem. And yet increasingly more of us are having it, and we don't have great mechanisms for how to handle it. So this is the other thing about being this sort of repetitious repeater that jumps back into these comfort tasks, the things that you're comfortable doing that you can do, is I think a lot of us are looking for some sort of comfort. We're looking for things that make us feel productive. For me, that's, handling physical objects, because I can, at the end of the day, point and say, yes, I did that. And I can get a tremendous sense of worth out of that I maybe don't get when I'm mapping out the next whatever phases of this thing that I want to do.
Yeah, especially because those don't have as immediate of a return, and you're not even sure that like if what you're doing at that point is the right thing to do. No, it's like you're making educated guesses, and it just doesn't feel as satisfying. So let me get back a little to this wall of awful.
Yeah, right.
No, this
it's a good. Great name.
Yeah, I do, and I also want to point out, just like you mentioned yesterday. We as humans are more likely to avoid the unpleasant, I forget the exact terminology you did, but something along those lines. Discomfort, yeah. Mm-hmm. So the wall of awful it's a metaphor, in case I didn't already mention that, but it's built of a wall of bricks.
It would be funny if it was like, right? Beef awful.
I like it. It's built of a wall of bricks that, and some of the things, it's like failure, worry, disappointment, rejection, forgetting, self-doubt, all of these types of things, they make up this wall. And so you come up to this wall and it's like, well, how do you deal with this wall? And so it says there's 5 ways to get past the wall, and 2 of them don't work, and one of them works but isn't the healthiest.
Yeah.
And so one of them is staring at it. You're just like, doesn't really work unless you have laser eyes.
Well, what happens if you give it the glee face?
Then the lasers just come out from everywhere, and then it's just like a sea. Actually, you don't even have them, but the rest of your choir behind you.
Oh, just
you just sit there, you stare, and then you go, and then just.
It's like a Care Bear stare.
Yeah,
out of the
exactly.
Eyes. Yeah,
I like it. The next one is to go around it, which that can work. May take a while, may not get you exactly the same spot you wanted to be, but that can work. Then there's the Hulk smash.
Oh, I was thinking Kool-Aid Man, but yeah, he just busts through.
Actually, I messed up. His go around it. He said, "No, you can't go around it." In this metaphor, you can't go around the wall.
Okay.
He said that doesn't work either.
Yeah, I like these.
It's a circular wall.
You just
yeah.
It's not actually a wall at all.
Yeah, exactly. So the Hulk smash, it was, that's when you start to either like lash out at other people or you beat yourself up and you're like, you're horrible. Why are you doing this? Why can't you do this? Or you need to do this, and just kind of like angrily beating yourself up. It might get you to the spot, but it's not the healthiest way to go. And then the next one is to climb the wall. And so one of the things says, well, one, you just climb it, but there's things you can do to help, which is what he calls adding handholds. Like if you're rock climbing, you got the different rocks to grab onto. So you can do some things to add handholds in there. And then the last one is to put a door in it. And so it's like, you see this wall and you're like, all right, I'm going to go ahead and put a door in it. And so I won't go completely through it, but those two videos are a good thing to check out. And it helps you recognize that one of the things in that actually was something we mentioned, I think, yesterday when we were talking about recognizing how long a task takes.
Oh, yeah.
So that little tidbit of knowledge came from this video, the second one, which was called How to Do Something That Should Be Easy But Is Not. And they call it, as one of the techniques of adding these handholds, is developing what he calls time wisdom. And that's where it's like, all right, instead of thinking, I got to mow the lawn, it's going to take all day, it's going to ruin everything. You mow the lawn one time and you time it and you see, okay, hey, that's going to take me 2 hours. So now I know, because another thing she mentioned was that people with ADHD often conflate their emotions with time. And so that's why adding that time wisdom will help you say, okay, wiping the counter off only takes me that 5 minutes. Unloading the dishwasher and loading it takes me 10 minutes. Like knowing the length of time can help you get through it. So yeah. So there's a little bit of that wall of awful. I thought that was a nice little relevant analogy.
Yeah, that's a good one. Mostly just kind of, I think you went a lot of directions with that metaphor analogy of that wall. There's some sort of fascinating things in there. This idea of putting a door in it, right? Or climbing over it, or, the one that was getting, when you're talking about the Hulk smash, I was thinking like Kool-Aid Man busting through the wall, but you were talking more about like lashing out at others or yourself. Right. And there's something about, I've seen this happen in businesses before where the boss just starts lashing other people until they achieve the goal for them. And it's just sort of a cruddy way to be, but it does seem to work. And you're right. Like, it's just like, what are the long-term ramifications of it? And I would assume they're not great. But yeah, this idea of like climbing over it is also kind of fascinating. Like, it's just sort of like recognizing all those things and then just going ahead and moving beyond it. But yeah, of course, the idea of building a door sounds easiest and best and probably the ultimate solution. But I'm the kind of guy that would really start fussing with the details of the door rather than actually going through it. So, it's one of those things to like keep in mind.
Yeah. And when he talked about putting the door in it, that was actually changing your emotional state around the thing. And so one of the examples they gave was talking about, hey, if you have a kid who is trying to work on his homework, but you see he's taken 20 minutes just to get his papers out of the backpack. Well, as a parent, one of the responses is naturally like, what are you doing? Like, grab your stuff and get going. Like, get started, do your thing, right? Because one of the thoughts is, well, they're just delaying the thing. But what they talk about is actually, obviously, some can be too much, but some having a little bit of that time is actually healthy, because what you were talking about earlier is giving them the preparation and the time to get ready to climb that wall, and they're all right, I'm building up the energy, like, yeah, I'm dragging my feet, maybe I'm productively procrastinating, doing these other things, but that's helping me build up the energy to get to be able to do the thing. And that was actually especially important now that we live in the coronavirus times, and everyone's working remote, and everyone has all these meetings, and they're back to back and all this type of stuff, and you no longer have a commute. Well, people may not have realized, but that took out so much of our in-between time, where you had this meeting, but then you had that time to go walk down the hall, to go to the bathroom, or before you're getting to work, you have that drive to kind of get in the headspace and prepare yourself to get there. And after work, you had that time to decompress and, hopefully maybe listen to a podcast or a lovely morning show or something that puts you in a good mood and helped you kind of process a little bit before you got home, versus nowadays it's just like, all right, click end meeting, and then you're gone to the next one, or you're going to do the next thing. You jump back into work.
You're already sitting in your house.
Right.
And so you sign off of a meeting, you walk out of your door, and you're in your home with your, spouse and maybe kids. And it's like that transition time, it's actually possible to do. It's actually possible to turn that switch and transition in that split second you move through that doorway. That is possible to do, and I've listened to Sam Harris and some of these other guys talk about that through meditation and awareness and those kind of things. But most of us, our brains don't operate that quickly, right? Like we don't have the capacity to sort of handle these mental state shifts that quickly. So I've ended up sort of trying to implement little rules for myself, like go for a walk. Just a few minutes after this, or circle around, or once you go from this space, go to this space and work on this for 15 minutes before heading inside, right? And these things allow me to just sort of shift states, because the last thing I want to do is have my wife hate my job because I walk in complaining after the end of every meeting,
right?
So these are things that I'm kind of thinking about more and more, that are setting up these arbitrary things and actually having importance behind them. The problem is when we make up these, like our commute was forced upon us. We had to commute. Now we have to like build in our own mental commute for ourselves to get that time back. And then we don't trust it, or we don't value it because
for sure
it wasn't forced upon us.
And we don't recognize what it's doing for us. And that's the thing now that has, changed or shifted because of the pandemic, is that, hey, you don't realize all the things that are happening at work, on the way to work, interactions with people. You don't realize all of the things that are going on there. And now a lot of those things are gone. And you don't realize now what that means you're missing, and what effect that has on you. And so that's part of what we're trying to point out to you here, is like, hey, there's all these functions that those things that you thought were useless actually had, and there's value that they provide you, even though you don't realize it. And so now, it's interesting to hear people like, oh, I'm never want to go back to the office again, and never blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you say that, but you're missing out on a lot. And especially, and you're losing some of that structure, so there's a lot.
Yeah, and you can rebuild it, but it just takes more work, and we're not accustomed to it, or we weren't. Maybe we are getting accustomed to it now. Mental health is one of course, the biggest, things on the rise since the pandemic that people ignored previously.
Right.
So
and just so the other ways to put the doors in it. So one way was to actually use music to change your emotional state. And so it's like, all right, I'm gonna go do this thing, or I'm gonna transition. So let me use some music to help me feel a different way. Example was like, hey, going to the gym, workout. Oh, Final Countdown, or Eye of the Tiger, getting pumped up. But other ways to put a door in it are setting a time limit. Doing a novel experience, or going to a novel places, or doing exercise. So doing those things can kind of help you change your emotional state, get ready to go through that door. So sometimes, if you have the big thing that you need to do, sometimes it's better to actually step away, go do something else, and then come back to it. So we're talking about the repetitious repeater here, and it kind of overlapped a little bit with the GAR that we're about to get to. But before we jump to that, any other thoughts on the repetitious repeater? I guess my question for you is, if you've had this happen in the past, you've had it happen now, what are one or a couple of things that you've done that you've found useful to get you out of that loop where you're finding yourself repeating the same thing that you don't want to be doing? What's gotten you out of that?
So the process for me involves one, recognizing the what I'm doing is not moving the needle, right? It's not prioritizing the right thing. It's actually just prioritizing some sort of comfort. And then I kind of remind myself of the kind of person I want to be, which is maybe not a person that exists entirely in comfort. Comfort's fine. So I go through these little kind of things and going like, oh, this is what's important, or this is what I want to be like, or this is, and also what I find is gearing myself up for the challenge, like not saying, "Oh, that's unfortunate and I don't want to deal with it," but actually saying like, "This is going to be a challenge. You're going to learn something new. This is going to be cool." Like I end up
reframing it a little
bit. Yeah,
yeah,
reframe it. I do a little mental jujitsu on myself, and yeah. But it's kind of something like that is the process I go through. I don't have sort of a firm process in mind, but I do sort of realize when I'm doing it now, and I can either forgive myself for doing it and just say, it's okay, this is your day.
Yeah.
And now this is your hobby time. This is not work time. You are just pursuing your hobby right now, which is feeling good.
And okay, by the way,
it's
you
totally
don't have
fine.
to always be doing
the
right
I don't
thing.
have to always be productive, but I just do need to recognize that I don't get to say I was working when I wasn't working,
right?
Because some of these things are not work for me; they're play.
Yeah, and then that's perfectly fine. And there is kind of an overlap, right, between what is work and what is play sometimes. And obviously, that's not true for everybody, but in some cases, it totally is. And one thing that I believe I brought up on the show before, but a term my business coach told me, because he lives in New Zealand, there's a term called faffing. I'm going to faff about, or I'm going to faff around, and it's like you're not strictly like messing around doing absolutely nothing. And this is at least the way I intended the definition and heard the definition. But you're not working, you're not playing. It's kind of the in between, but it's like your time that we've talked about time blocking. So now I actually have some time blocks where I'm going to faff about during that time block. And I might just be doing, fun personal things. But it's also possible I might watch a video or something that is pertaining to what I'm working on, or maybe I might research that issue that I've got, but or I might do these kind of little tasks in between, or maybe I won't. But it allows that time for me to spend that time either just relaxing and doing nothing, or if I wanted to do a couple of things that are kind of work but not like heads down focused work, that's one way that I've used to help take care of some of those things. And also by having that scheduled time, that's like, hey, here's that time. It can be kind of like a catch all for those loose things. No,
that's it's a nice little sort of space to have. Part of it is being forgiving, and part of it is being aware. It's one reason I think we tend to categorize all these things: work, play, faffing, chores, all these kind of different things. Is we categorize them so we can change how we feel about them. And so sometimes just changing how you feel about the thing, or reframing it, as you said earlier, is a really kind of vital step to like kind of figuring it out so you can move on.
Right. And that's what I want. One thing I want to point out is like, whether or not you call it that, like, you're probably doing some kind of faffing already. And so this is again where it comes back to the time blocking and the scheduling. It's like, well, if you schedule that into your day, you're giving it a time and place that you set the time limit for. You know when it is. You're controlling that, right?
Yeah.
Versus if you just pretend like, oh, I don't need that, and it's like, well, then you're in between those meetings and you don't have time to go to the bathroom. You don't have time to think. You had all those little small things that popped up. You never gave yourself the time to actually work on those. And at the end of the day, you're like frazzled and upset and frustrated. And you're like, man, there's so many things to do, and you're overwhelmed. And it's like, well, yeah, because you never gave yourself that time to have that kind of in between. And so by having that subtle shift and scheduling it in, that's you're giving yourself the ability to do that. So when we're talking about, the repetitious repeater, how do you stop doing that thing that you no longer want to do, but you can't figure out how? Or, kind of similarly, there's something that you want to do, but you just can't, make it happen. So the first step, I think, and as you mentioned it, is realizing and recognizing that you're doing it. And then the next step, and this may sound overly simplistic, but try something different. It sounds way overly simplistic, but a lot of people are like, this isn't working. This isn't working. This isn't working. And, there's that saying, it's like, the definition of insanity is trying the same thing twice and expecting a different result.
Yeah, right. Or trying it over and over again. This is what we tend to do. It just reminded me too, like Sam Harris has in his meditation app, Waking Up, he has this little thing. He goes, you are the champion of being yourself. You will repeat the same behaviors over and over again. Well, why don't you give that person a break? Mm-hmm. Like, just let that person go for a while. Like, and it's kind of fascinating. We are so good at being ourselves and just repeating the same behaviors ad nauseum forever. And then this idea that we actually want any kind of different result is ludicrous. Yet we do it all the times to ourselves. And then we're frustrated by that. We're frustrated by being super ourselves. I find this all to be really quite funny.
Yeah, no, it is. And it's like, all right, well, recognize you're going to do that thing and then kind of shape and control it, right? And say, okay, don't expect you to stop doing that thing altogether, at least not immediately, right? Maybe over time with lots of practice, things like that. Yeah. But if you can contain it and control it, then that can be useful. So step 1's realizing it, and then step 2 is doing something different. We talked about the couple of videos that are worth checking out from the channel How to ADHD on YouTube. We shared 2 of those videos in the chat that talk about the wall of awful and some techniques that help you kind of get past that. But for me, the repetitious repeater thing is not getting out of bed when I want to in the morning. And so, I realize I have some stints where I do a good job, and then I have times where I don't do such a good job. And I was like, all right, well, if I'm going to set the alarm for this time with the aspiration of getting up earlier, I need to either do it or not, because I'm not getting the benefit of it. And then it's like, okay, if you get out of bed and then your wife doesn't get out of bed and she sits there all warm and cozy and, it's like, oh, snuggles. And then you see that and you're like, do you think caveman brain early in the morning is going to say no? And so then it's like, oh, warm, cozy, it's cold outside. And it's all about
discomfort.
Avoiding that discomfort, yeah. And so now for me, some of the techniques I've done is, all right, I have my lights, they come on automatically, for 10 minutes before I'm waking up. And then also I have my phone in the other room, so the alarm goes off. I have to get up and go do that. And now I actually bought a cattle prod so I can poke my wife to make sure she gets out. Because really it's her fault.
I was picking up on that. I was picking up on like, oh, she has the good life all snug.
And then sometimes there's Lincoln, the dog, just hops in there. He's like, oh, I need more snuggles and love too.
Gotta get a second cattle prod.
Second cattle prod.
Batteries charged up on those suckers. Oh.
So that's our repetitious repeater. Let's jump over to the grrr. Go ask, writer, and read. And our question that we had from one of our viewers was, hey, I've recognized that I want to make this improvement in my life. I've recognized that I want to work on me. I want to do some things that are going to make me a better person, right? I want to learn another language. I want to start learning this new skill. And they kind of gave a couple of examples of like, hey, here's the things that I'm trying to do. But how do you do it? How do you find the motivation? How do you find the space and time to do it? Especially when they ask, they're like, look, you're an entrepreneur. Is like, you got to do this all the time, right? How do you find the motivation and time and effort to do the thing that you want to do? So I want to point out, this is very relevant to the topic we were just discussing previous to this, which was the repetitious repeater. So if you didn't hear that, you might want to check that out as well. But writer, what do you do when you have that, kind of that personal thing that you want to improve on that you don't need to do? You don't have anyone holding you accountable for doing, but you've recognized you want to do it. And maybe you've tried, for a week or a couple weeks. Maybe you had this idea like, oh, I thought this year I would, start writing that novel, or I would start exploring that new interest in food or whatever. Like, but I just never did it, So what do I do now?
Oof. Jeez. I mean, what I tend to do is I pull out the old whip and I start flagellating myself.
Self-flagellation.
Yeah.
That's the finest. Like, and that's when the glee face comes out.
Yeah, that's, aha. Yeah. No, there is.
Do you have Mario inside of you?
That would be funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I kind of do that thing where, which is unfortunate, but there's a part of me that does kind of kick myself a little bit. But I find that voice also goes away really quickly. It's hard to sort of sustain. I don't want to be angry at myself. It's easier to change the narrative and just go like, well, I never really wanted to do that anyway, or I never really needed to learn that anyway, right? Because that's the other thing about
avoiding that discomfort.
Yeah, because I speak English and I live in America, and almost all Americans only speak one language. So, I'm fine with not learning Spanish. It's one of these things where you can continue to like just sort of poo-poo yourself and kick the can on down the road. I'll do it next year.
Right.
All those things are excuses I tell myself for all sorts of things all the time. There are other things though that I'm pretty good at being disciplined about, and I wonder why that is. Like, why am I good about being disciplined around art-related activities, but not good when it comes to things like randomly learning a foreign language? And I have to think something to do with priorities and which ones of those will actually better my life, which ones of them actually have immediate ramifications on me. So I kind of think about it a lot sort of contextually, which ones will help.
Yeah, well, it's a really good point. So I would say if that purpose, the real, because I guess let me put it this way: whether or not you realize it, your brain is probably rationalizing, even on like a self-conscious or the subconscious level, right? And so you're like, yeah, I want to learn Spanish, but there's really no point for me to. Like, I want to, but it's just purely from this aspirational purpose. So
yeah, I just want to be the kind of person.
I want to be the kind of person who right?
Yeah.
This is the perfect question for that, right? If I want to be the type of person who blanks, well, if that context, that purpose doesn't actually exist, one of the tricks you might be able to try is giving yourself that purpose, right? So say you want to learn Spanish, well, maybe book a trip. And then it's like, hey, all right, now this has turned from just being an aspirational thing to something that's more specific, measurable, etc. It's more of a SMART goal. And so that's again, one of the first steps to doing the thing is, hey, putting it in writing, right? Kind of like we talked about with the goal setting, it makes you, I don't remember the stat off the top of my head, but 95% more likely to do the thing or whatever, because when you actually write it down, it does something differently with your brain, and you actually have a lot more intention behind it. But yeah, so if it's a language, then setting a trip is like, hey, well, I'm going to go to this Latin American country in 3 months, and no matter what, I'm going to go, and maybe I'll have no Spanish experience by then, but maybe that'll be enough to help inspire me. Like, all right, if I'm going to go, then I'm going to pick up all those fly ladies and be like, hey, girl.
I know.
Hola, chica.
Or fend off the fly guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, no.
Who could do that? You just turn around and just give them that.
Glee face.
Yeah.
Why do I do the pointy thing? It's like
it's bonus glee face.
It's like I'm out of a 50s.
When your eye lasers are out, you need the extra gun lasers.
By the way, you think it's coming out of the finger, but it's coming out of the eyeballs.
Yeah, they're looking there, and it's just
trick
misdirection.
Yeah.
I like it. So one of the things is giving yourself the deadline, right?
Yeah.
And so another technique that I wanted to point out was same kind of thing with the time blocking. It's like, all right, if it's something that you're saying is important and you want it to happen, then put it on your calendar. And that may be as simple as just like putting it on your phone calendar and saying, all right, Wednesday from 4 to 6 p.m. I'm going to work on this thing, right? And some people will be like, wow, 4 to 6 p.m., 2 hours? And then, well, that's too much. It's way too much. Well, that's okay if that's too much for you. Another big trick is to start small. Don't try and do it all at once. Like if you've been struggling for months and months to do it, don't try and do all right, now 4 hours a day, every day, no matter what, I'm going to do it. It's like, no, just start off with 15 minutes. Like, all right, I'm going to do 15 minutes a day. And then maybe on some days I'll be feeling it a little bit more and I'll go a little longer. Maybe on some days I'll just do that 15 minutes. But by doing it just that small amount, you can then start to build up the habit and the routine. So if a lot of the things that people want to do to improve themselves or to become somebody, that is going to take a lot of repetition, ironically. But yeah, forming those habits and forming those routines and not determining or not depending on that willpower.
Right. Yeah, we've talked about that before. The willpower will let you down because it's in limited supply. So that's one thing. The other one there that is really good that I find myself doing as well is like starting out with a habit, even when I started trying to meditate, it was hard to sit down for 5 minutes and just keep your eyes shut for 5 minutes. So, you build up over time. It's like endurance, it's like weight training, it's like any of these things. You don't have to show up every day to do the things. Sometimes it's easier on people to give themselves, I have to show up every day for 5 minutes.
Right.
And then once they're there, they start doing things. We were talking about that yesterday. There's a lot of little different hacks. Different ones will work for you in different ways. But one of the big things is getting your environment right as well. James Clear in Atomic Habits brings that up quite a bit toward the end of the book, is you have to change your environment. Make your environment where it's easy for you to win, where it's easy for you to have these wonderful things happen for yourself. So if you need to clear all of the distractions out of your room, or if you need to block this time out and tell your spouse, lock the door and keep me in the room for 2 hours until I get this done, you can set up an environment which will make it easier on you to do these things. Usually, if this is something that you think you want to do, such as learning a foreign language or whatever it is, learning how to code JavaScript or something like this, and you think that this will help you, then sometimes it's just trouble getting started. So all we really need to do is get started, get the ball rolling, and then after we're in it for a while, start with 15 minutes. You'll probably end up doing it for 2 hours.
Right. And I can't overstate how important the environment can be, because I feel like a lot of times what people do is, all right, I've been in my home office, I've been working all day, and then, I also use that computer to, I play some games, I watch some Netflix or whatever, I relax on that. And then in that same exact spot, now I want to transition to learning Spanish.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, and I can hear the kids in the background. I can see all the work around the house that needs to be done. Like I have all these visual and auditory, and I can smell dinner being cooked. I have all these reminders of all these other things, that are pulling me away. But yet I'm mad at myself for not being able to push through and be able to focus. And it's like, hey, sometimes the main key is just get out of there. Yeah. Like go outside, go sit on a bench, go to a park, go to a
Spanish
coffee
on
shop.
An audiobook while you're taking a walk.
Yeah, go to the library. Go, maybe you didn't need to. Another thing too is, I guess two big traps that I've seen are trying to do it by yourself and trying to force yourself to do it a certain way. And those are two things that both my wife Danielle and I have struggled from ourselves. As a solo entrepreneur, especially during a pandemic, like it's really easy to get that feeling of overwhelm and like, oh, I'm all alone. There's no one working on this with me. Like this sucks. And oh, by the way, that often leads to the vicious cycle of I feel bad, I don't have motivation, then I don't do things, and then I feel bad and I don't have motivation, I don't do things. So it's not the best loop to get into. And then the same kind of thing with, just say, for example, with Danielle, she's a writer. And so as a writer, there's, a dozen million different ways to go about it. Some people are like, every day I get in 2,000 words. Some people are like, every day I sit down and I have 5 shots of whiskey and then I write until I pass out. Or, some people is like, I write when I feel like it. And there's all these different methods. But, one of the things that Danielle has struggled with is she's like, I try to do it this way, but then I just can't get it working. I can't get it clicking. It's like kind of like we're talking about. Well, don't fight yourself and don't expect yourself to change. Set up the situation and the environment to work for you, not you having to. You're already trying to do this aspirational thing. Don't force yourself to do it in some different way that's way different than the other things you do, right? Try and line it up how you find yourself doing good things right and productive and things like that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of learning techniques and learning knowledge out there now. This is one other thing to do before you jump into some of this stuff. Of course, set your environment, do all this, but they're like, for instance, learning languages. Like Tim Ferriss has this really wonderful blog that he's collected about 12 of the best language learning articles you can find. So you can do some research, you can figure out which system is going to work best for you. Those are other steps. Sometimes those can be procrastination at some point, but might as well get the right system in place. It's going to make it easy, and at least that way you can have faith in the system, and that way if it's not working, it's probably you. And you just need to put in a little more effort here and there. I mean, I'm not going to be one of these people that says like everything should be easy. I think the challenge of these things is what makes them worthwhile. And that's the fascinating part. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. It won't be easy. It's gonna suck. Embrace the suck.
Great point. Yeah, embrace the suck. I've actually heard people use that phrase before. Which is, a lot of things that are worth doing have some difficulty or friction or frustration associated with them. So yeah, don't expect things not to have friction or not to suck, right? Because there is going to be some suck involved, and it's just about how well can you get past that. And I guess one of the main things we want to point out is you don't think you're going to have all this willpower to be able to just force through that every time. Set up the situation, set up the environment, set up the habits to get yourself in the right state of mind, get you in the right spot to better avoid the suck, and also systematically work through the suck. And so one thing I mentioned, but I want to make sure to touch on a little more, was not doing it in isolation. Right? And so if there's something that that you want to do, one of the best ways to get successful and to make sure you do it is to bring other people into the fold with you. And that could be someone who's doing the exact same thing with you.
Yes.
Or it could be someone who's just like, hey, we're friends, or maybe we're just people who met on the internet, and we're going to help hold each other accountable. And there's this term called an accountability partner, or another term is called a mastermind group. And that's where you have, hey, a group of people who are trying to achieve something. And sometimes it's the same thing, like, oh, we're trying to start this podcast and we want to, do it all together. Or we're going to the gym and we're going to do this boot camp every morning for 12 weeks together, right? So sometimes rallying around that same thing and doing that same thing and being in the suck together, that's a very useful technique. I mean, if you look at exercise and work, which has a whole bunch of psychology going on with it, like some of the people who do the best with that are the people who get up and they do it with the group, right? Because they're motivated, they've got their friends who are going, they don't want to let them down. They're okay letting themselves down, but they don't want to let other people down.
It also makes it more fun. It's hard when you're doing all these things on your own. You mentioned that previously with Danielle and with the business, is like there's not other people around helping me. I'm doing this all on my own. And there's I personally like doing things on my own, but a lot of other people are so motivated by the social group that they're in that it's like, yeah, you got to set up some sort of the dynamic that not all, like, it makes it fun, but it also has some accountability in it. So I think those are all good things. Surround yourself with the right kind of, that's environment again. Surrounding yourself with the right kind of community is also a type of environment.
Yeah. All right. So, trying to find, the motivation, trying to do the thing that gets them doing the thing they want to do. So you mentioned Atomic Habits by James Clear. Another one that I want to mention is called The Habit Loop, which I think is Charles Duhigg. So I'll throw some links for those in the chat. But the Habit Loop, the big thing in that one is you have some sort of trigger or event, and then that leads to some action that you're doing. And it's a loop because basically that's what's always going to happen. And so kind of the first step is recognizing what the trigger is, and then you find something to replace or change that action. So, a common example when it comes to habits, addiction, like, oh, okay, I recognize I smoke cigarettes, I'm addicted to nicotine. Well, realistically, it's this hand motion that, it's actually, that's the addictive thing. Obviously the chemicals involved too, but that is the thing. So, all right, I've got the trigger of, oh, I'm feeling a little antsy. I, want to do something with my hands. It's like, oh, so then maybe some people switch to sunflower seeds or something where they're still getting that hand to mouth movement, but it's now taking the thing out. So they're changing that habit loop to replace the behavior with something else. Instead of what a lot of people try and do is they have the habit loop and then they just think they can just completely destroy the loop altogether. Well, one of the things he points out in that book is like, you might have more success inserting or changing that behavior or adding a different behavior to replace it versus just trying to stop it altogether.
That makes a lot of sense to me. It's baby steps, right? And we're kind of talking about that. Like there's little ways to kind of hack yourself. But yeah, a lot of these things that we do that we don't like doing have been built up over decades, or maybe not decades, but years anyway. And sort of unwinding them all at once is also unrealistic. So I don't know where that kind of myth comes from, but we always talk about these people that have amazing willpower and they just go out and do this thing. And we're just like, wow, if I could only be like that. I've got to think that's almost a myth.
Right.
There are people who do it. Yeah, sure. But, most of us are going to have these slow, gradual changes.
Yes. And I wanted to make sure to point out the book itself is called The Power of Habit: Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business by Charles Duhigg. And within that, he talks about this habit loop. So I'll include that link in the chat as well as James Clear who is the author of Atomic Habits. So those are two very, very well-regarded habits books that a lot of people have read and spoken about, and they help change a lot. Well, any other last thoughts or for our viewer?
No. I mean, it's of course, let us know if we completely missed the boat on where we went with that conversation. If you're like, I know all this stuff and it doesn't work, let us know. Let us try to troubleshoot this with you. It's something that it's easy to talk about. It's easy to collect this knowledge and habits and all that kind of stuff, but implementing it can be hard.
Yeah, and I want to point out that, you mentioned like you like to do things by yourself, but just like we were talking about how when you go to a job and on site, there's a lot of things that you don't recognize that you're getting. Like same kind of thing. Like, yeah, there are people who they certainly do better working by themselves, but also it's still good for them to every now and then interact with other people and get a fresh set of eyes. And, I remember a couple weeks ago, you're like, I had this one problem I was working on and doing this thing, and I kept doing this and this and this. And it's like, well, did you think about that? It's like, no. Like 3 hours later. And it's like, oh, so you spent 4 hours working on that when your wife was in the other room and she could have helped you do that in 30 minutes. And you're like,
yeah. There is some sort of really stubborn, it's almost a machismo thing. I don't think it's relegated only to men, but it is something about like, I can do this on my own, and you get very stubborn and hard-headed about things, and then I take a kind of pride in that, and that's all kind of toxic and damaging. And so, but in the moments, I don't even realize I'm doing it now. Mm-hmm. So talking about like an ingrained coping mechanism behavior that I really need to probably unpack.
And oh, by the way, if you're by yourself and there's no one else to realize you're doing that,
no one
then
can
you just
kind
of slip on forever. Whereas if it's like you have some regular times where you're checking in or you're doing it, and then you can have someone outside of you say, hey, Ryder, like, it's been 4 weeks, man. Like, you still haven't done that gate. Is there something going on there? Like, and then they can, and that might be the trigger where it's like, okay, yeah, now someone else is seeing it too. And hey, you really seem to be focusing on all these other things, but you told me this was important. And so that's the value of getting someone else outside of you to work on that with you. To talk about a handful of things, right? We've getting some other people involved. We talked about the idea of doing some sort of boot camp or something like that. If there is a task that you're trying to do or something you're trying to accomplish, like there are plenty of online communities out there. There are courses out there. There's what's called a cohort type of course, which we're going to be actually doing one of those in the new year around cooking. And that's where you're going through something at the same time. You're trying to achieve that end goal together. You may even have some curriculum that helps you. Don't underestimate the value of that. There's a reason why schools exist in the way they do, because they add that structure, they add that time and place, they add the metrics, they add the mentor, the guide. They have all those things to help you do that, right? There's a reason why that's how most people go through the education system, is because a lot of those things work, right? So that's another technique for you is look at your life and, hey, when you were killing it, when you were doing those things that you wanted to be doing, maybe it's in a completely different area. Maybe it's like, hey, playing video games, which you may not look at as productive, but hey, that's when I'm in my flow state or whatever. Like, figure out what are the things you can set up to kind of replicate that for whatever this new thing is you're working on. And maybe it looks completely different.
Well, and also, video games do incremental challenge. So your skills go up as you play the video game. So it's one of these things why people can get into flow state while playing something like a video game. It's designed for you to just improve just enough each level, challenge you just enough. It keeps you in that kind of Goldilocks zone. It's not Goldilocks, but it's like a zone of competence that it just pushes you just far enough that you're always engaged, but you're not frustrated.
Right.
And so there's this weird balance between those two. And if you can sort of map those gaming skills over into anything else, you're bound to be successful.
Yeah, and focusing on that incremental part may be a part of it, right? It's like, I'm not going to redesign this whole website overnight. Like, hey, you know what? Tonight I'm going to move that button. And some people may joke, but sometimes moving a button is more complicated and harder than you think.
Yeah, it can be.
So many things are telling that button what to do.
I know. You're just like, how many things do I have to override?
Sometimes I feel like that button.
Hard to move. Out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, any challenges just jump to mind for you today as we talked about the repetitious repeater? How do you get past those things that you either are been trying to do for a really long time but you can't, or maybe it's something you've find yourself doing all the time, but you recognize you don't want to be doing that anymore. So we talked a lot about those types of things. And then in our GAR, we talked about finding the motivation to do that thing. I've decided I want to improve. I decided I want to become that person. I want to do those things. But now I'm struggling with the next step. What do I do now? So kind of related things and motivations. And yesterday we talked a little about goals. So anything along those drumming up a challenge in your mind, or should I throw one out there?
Throw one out there. Like I think we've kind of talked around the subject a lot, and we talked about some stuff yesterday. I thought our goal yesterday was good. Is nice and actionable.
Yeah,
like just
So I
goal
think
for this week.
I think So yesterday was set a goal for this week, and so I like the idea again of starting small and getting something going. Right. So my challenge for you guys is pick the one thing that you're trying to work on. And notice I said one,
Yes.
not 500 or 30, or even though your spouse or significant other might be telling you, fix all these things, change all these things. Well, just pick the one thing, and pick the one thing for you that you want to change, that you want to improve, that you want to learn, and sit down right now, right after this, and schedule the time to take the next steps on that. And so it may seem overly simplistic, but put the time on your calendar to do the thing. And a lot of times that is literally all it takes, right? We talked about how difficult it can be to get that first step. Well, block off the time, and maybe it starts out as 15 minutes, maybe it's 30, maybe it's an hour, whatever it is might vary for the person, what they're trying to accomplish. But put that time on your calendar and go ahead and hit that repeat button on there too. Like if it's something that's important to you, just decide like, hey, I'm going to do this every Wednesday, and I'm going to put this timer every day or every Saturday or whatnot. And oh, by the way, be willing to let that shift and mold. Don't force yourself into that hole, right? Like try it and see how it works. And if you're recognizing, well, that really bumps up against Jimmy's soccer practice, and I thought that might be good, but realistically I found out it's not. Okay, that's fine. Don't get rid of it altogether, which is another thing. It's like you try the thing, try and force it in, it doesn't work, and you like throw up your hands like, whoa, what's the point? It's like, no, just recognize it's okay to pivot, be like an entrepreneur, pivot, shift to another thing, and make sure your expectations are right, and then go from there. And don't be unrealistic, right? Like if you've got a job, you got a kid, you got all these things, or even if you just have one job, but if you have this thing that's very taxing, taking all of your time and energy, like give yourself a little break. Like, all right, you worked 50 plus hours, you cleaned the house, you cooked, you did all these things, you fixed the car, and now you're trying to learn a language too. Like give yourself a little bit of grace when you don't have all the gas to do that. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. And these things, there's going to be times in your life where some of these things will be easier than others.
Yeah.
And that's just if things happen in seasons.
Very true. Very true. Any other thoughts or additions to that challenge? Or
no, I like that one. I like that. Just find one thing.
Yeah, find one thing. Yeah. All right. Well, with that, y'all have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, and we'll see you tomorrow.